You ever have one of those moments where you realize your life is about to change, but you're totally unprepared for how? That's exactly where I was standing one humid Tuesday evening, elbow deep in wet clay, trying not to look like a complete amateur in front of a room full of strangers. I was supposed to be the teacher, Mr. Pottery Guy, guiding everyone through the basic humps of wheel throwing. But honestly, I was just hoping no one noticed my hands shaking. I mean, I'd taken some pottery classes before, enough to not completely embarrass myself. And when the community center asked if I wanted to run a beginner's workshop, I figured, why not? It was a steady gig, and honestly, working with clay was therapeutic in a way my day job at the marketing firm never was. Plus, I liked the idea of creating something with my own two hands instead of just pitching ideas on a screen all day. So there I was, surrounded by a dozen awkwardly eager faces, all hovering over their spinning wheels, clutching lumps of clay like they were about to defuse a bomb. And then he walked in. I didn't catch his name right away. He was late, slipping quietly through the door with this half smile that looked like he was both sorry and a little amused at himself. Dark hair a little tousled, glasses sliding down his nose, and the kind of casual style that somehow made a plain gray shirt look interesting. He set up his wheel in the corner, giving me a quick nod that somehow made the whole room seem a little less intimidating. What struck me first was how natural he seemed at it. His hands moved with confidence, pressing and shaping the clay almost as if it was an extension of himself. I kept stealing glances, trying to focus on my teaching, but it was hard not to notice. He wasn't like the other beginners fumbling around. There was something about the way he worked that felt intentional, even a little vulnerable. By the time we got to the part where everyone was supposed to center their clay on the wheel, I noticed him lean a bit closer to me, asking questions that were less about technique and more about the process, the feel of the wetness between your fingers, the way the clay responds to pressure. It wasn't just curiosity. It felt like he was searching for something intangible and maybe hoping I had it. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to make of it. The class was supposed to be straightforward, teach the steps, help people make a pot, maybe have some laughs, but now there was this undercurrent, this quiet exchange happening between us, and I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if he was too. Then, during a break, he asked if I wanted to see something. I was expecting maybe a finished piece from a previous class or some pottery tools, but instead he pulled out a small lump of clay from his bag and started molding it right there on the table. Only, it wasn't just clay he was shaping. It felt like he was molding something much more delicate, something I wanted to be part of, but didn't quite know how to ask for. That night, as I cleaned up and packed away the wheels, I kept thinking back to the way his hands moved, so sure and tender. I knew this wasn't just about pottery anymore, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever it was that had just started to form between us, but I wanted to find out. I almost didn't know how to respond when he looked up at me, his eyes holding this quiet invitation that made my heart skip. We were standing there in the middle of the room, the hum of the spinning wheels and the soft thuds of hands pressing clay filling the background like a soundtrack to some kind of awkward dance I didn't quite know the steps to. "Want to try?" he asked, holding out the lump of clay. I hesitated for a second, feeling that familiar nod of self-doubt creep in. I mean, I was supposed to be the teacher here, but something about the way he smiled like he was letting me in on a secret made me want to say yes. So I took the clay from him, and as soon as my fingers touched the cool, damp surface, everything else, the noise, the nervous energy, even my shaky hands, just softened. We started molding it together, his hands guiding mine gently at first, then with more ease, like we were both learning how to trust the other without saying a word. It was ridiculous, really. Two guys making a mess of clay in a community center pottery class. But I swear, in those minutes, it felt like the rest of the world fell away. I kept catching myself stealing glances at him, the way his lips curled up when he concentrated, the slight crease between his brows. "Ever done this before?" I asked, trying to sound casual but probably failing. He shook his head, a little embarrassed. "Not really. I've always wanted to, though. It just seems real, like you're creating something honest." That hit me harder than I expected. Because yeah, pottery was real. It was raw and messy and imperfect. And maybe that's why I liked it so much, because it didn't try to hide anything. We wrapped up the class that night with everyone clapping for their own lumpy little bowls and pots. But for me, the real story was in the quiet moments after, when he helped me pack up and we ended up sitting on the worn-out benches outside the community center, talking about everything and nothing. His name was Jamie, by the way. I only found that out after about 5 minutes of awkward silence and a desperate, "So, what's your name?" He laughed, shaking his head like I was some kind of dork. "Jamie. And you?" "Eli." Jamie smiled, and I swear it was like the night got a little warmer just from that. We talked about our jobs, him working at a small bookstore down the street, me still slogging through marketing pitches, and somehow pottery became our way of bridging the gap between two completely different worlds. He told me about how he'd always loved art, but never had the guts to try something new until now. And I shared how this workshop was my way of stepping out of my own comfort zone. There was a vulnerability in his voice that I felt in my chest, a quiet honesty that made me want to protect it, to keep it safe. By the time we parted ways, there was this unspoken understanding hanging between us. Like, this wasn't just the end of a class, but maybe the start of something neither of us expected. Over the next few weeks, Jamie kept showing up for the pottery classes. He was always a little late, always a little shy, but he was there. And with every session, I noticed him opening up more, not just about pottery techniques, but about life, dreams, and fears. One evening, after everyone else had left, he stayed behind, helping me clean up the studio. He was quieter than usual. His usual spark dimmed just a bit. "Everything okay?" I asked, not wanting to pry, but genuinely concerned. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I guess I just didn't expect to feel this way. About anything, really." I looked at him, trying to read between the lines. "This way." He met my gaze, eyes searching mine like he was trying to figure out if I'd understand. Like I'm starting to care about someone, more than I thought I could. My heart thudded loud enough I was sure he could hear it. "And who's that someone?" He bit his lip, then smiled sheepishly. "Maybe it's you, Eli." And just like that, everything shifted. I laughed nervously, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. "Well, I was kinda hoping you'd say that." From that night on, the pottery class wasn't just about clay anymore. It became our little world, a place where we could be honest, messy, and maybe, just maybe, start molding something real between us. But like any good story, it wasn't all smooth spinning wheels and perfect pots. There were moments of doubt, awkward confessions, and the inevitable fear of messing it all up. Still, every time I saw Jamie's smile, every time I felt his hand brush mine as we worked side by side, I knew it was worth it. Because sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places, even a pottery class on a sweaty Tuesday night. After that night, things between us started to take on a life of their own, like the clay we worked with, sometimes smooth, sometimes unpredictable, and always a little bit messy. Jamie showed up to the classes more consistently, his confidence growing with each session, but it was the moments outside of class that began to mean the most. We started grabbing coffee after the workshops, our conversations veering far from pottery techniques into the territory of favorite books, childhood memories, and the kind of personal stuff you don't usually share with someone you just met. One night, after a particularly long class where I'd been showing everyone how to glaze their pieces, Jamie and I found ourselves lingering behind again. The studio was dimly lit, and the faint scent of wet earth hung in the air. He was playfully flicking a bit of clay at me as I rinsed my hands at the sink, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Do you always make a mess when you work with clay? Or is it just me?" I asked, grinning. He shrugged, smiling but with a hint of something softer in his eyes. "I think it's part of the process. You can't really create something perfect without a little mess." That struck a chord with me. I realized maybe that's how Jamie approached life, embracing the messiness instead of running from it, and I admired that about him more than I could say. "Speaking of messes," I said, drying my hands on a rag, "have you ever thought about making something outside of class? Like, I don't know, your own project?" He looked surprised but intrigued. "I haven't really. I guess I didn't think I had the patience." "Well, I could come by and help you. Sort of like a pottery buddy." I teased. His smile deepened, and for a moment, the space between us felt charged. "I'd like that." A few days later, Jamie invited me over to his apartment to see his setup, basically a tiny corner with a small makeshift wheel, and a shelf of books stacked haphazardly. It wasn't fancy, but it was his space, and I could tell he'd carved it out carefully, like a secret nook where he could be himself. We spent hours there, hands covered in clay, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, Jamie paused, holding a half-formed bowl in his hands, and looked over at me. You know, I wasn't expecting to feel so connected to someone this fast, he admitted, voice low. I swallowed hard, feeling that familiar mix of nerves and excitement. Me neither, but I'm really glad. There was a softness to his gaze that made my heart pound in a way I hadn't quite experienced before. It wasn't just attraction or curiosity, it was something deeper, more grounded. As the night wore on, we moved from pottery to music, swapping playlists and laughing over songs we both loved or hated. It was easy, comfortable, like we'd known each other longer than a few weeks. Then, just as I was about to leave, Jamie reached out, fingers brushing mine lightly. "Can I be honest?" "Always," I said. He took a breath, hesitating for a moment before leaning in just enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. "I'm scared, Eli. Scared that this, whatever it is, won't last." I nodded because, yeah, I was scared too. But I also knew that sometimes the scariest things are the ones worth taking a chance on. "I'm here," I told him quietly, "for as long as you want." He smiled then, a real, honest smile, and that's when it happened. The gentle brush of his lips against mine, tentative at first, then firmer, like he was molding something fragile but precious between us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some cinematic moment. It was real and messy and exactly what I needed. From then on, our relationship grew alongside our pottery skills, flawed, sometimes clumsy, but undeniably ours. We learned how to navigate the awkwardness of new love while juggling work, life, and the occasional cracked pot. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Jamie surprised me by showing up at the community center with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" I asked, curious. He shrugged, cheeks flushed. "Thought you might like it." When I peeled back the paper, I found a small clay vase, rough around the edges, but beautiful all the same. On the bottom, Jamie had carved our initials. "I made it for you," he said softly. I felt my throat tighten. "Jamie, it's perfect," he laughed nervously. "I guess I'm learning how to mold more than just clay." I pulled him into a hug, the two of us surrounded by the scent of wet earth and the promise of something new. And in that moment, I knew this was just the beginning. After Jamie gave me that rough little vase with our initials carved into the bottom, things started to feel more real between us, like the tiny cracks and imperfections in the pottery were just part of the story we were building together. I kept that vase on my desk at home, somewhere I'd see it every morning, reminding me how much had changed in just a few weeks. But, as much as I wanted to believe everything was smooth sailing, life has a way of throwing in unexpected lumps of clay to knead into the mix. One night, a couple of weeks after that, Jamie showed up at my apartment later than usual. His usual easy smile was there, but his eyes were heavy, like he'd been carrying something around all day. I was halfway through making pasta. Not exactly gourmet, but comfort food. And I asked, "Rough day?" He shrugged, dropping his bag by the door. "You could say that. Work was a mess. And then I got some bad news about my dad." I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What happened? Is he okay?" Jamie sat down at the kitchen table, hands clasped tight. "He's fine physically, but he's been diagnosed with early dementia. It's been hitting him hard, and my mom's struggling to manage everything." I could see the weight hanging off his shoulders, and suddenly, the playful, carefree guy I'd been getting to know felt miles away. "I'm really sorry, Jamie," I said softly, moving over to sit next to him. "That sounds incredibly tough," he nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I don't know how to handle it all. It's like watching someone disappear piece by piece, and I feel helpless." I reached out, running my fingers through his hair, something I hadn't realized I wanted to do until that moment. "You're not alone in this. You've got me, okay? We'll figure it out together." He looked up, eyes glistening. and gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Eli. That means a lot." That night, we talked for hours, the conversation shifting from pottery and lighthearted banter to fears about the future and how to support family through something so painful. I realized then that what we were building wasn't just about new love. It was about being there for each other when things got messy and complicated. Over the next few weeks, Jamie's visits became a little less regular, not because he wanted space, but because his family obligations were demanding more and more of his time. I didn't push him, but I missed him like crazy. One evening, I decided to surprise him. I showed up at his apartment with a couple of pizzas and a batch of fresh clay, hoping to remind him of the things that brought us together in the first place. When he opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise, and a smile finally broke through the usual exhaustion. "Eli, you didn't have to," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Nah, I figured we could use a little break from all the heavy stuff," I said, setting the food down and pulling out the clay. "Thought we could make something, anything, to take our minds off things for a bit." We spent the evening laughing as we shaped the clay, Jamie's fingers still skilled despite the chaos in his life. For a while, it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist, and that was exactly what we both needed. But as much as I wanted to shelter him from pain, I knew life wouldn't give us that luxury. One afternoon, I found Jamie sitting on his couch, staring blankly at a photo album spread out in front of him. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He sighed, tracing a finger over a picture of his parents from years ago. "I'm scared, Eli. Scared of losing him. My dad means everything to me." I put an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "I get it, and it's okay to be scared, but we'll face it together." He leaned into me, and for the first time since this all started, I felt the fullness of what we had. Not just the fun and the spark, but the depth of partnership. The kind that sticks around when things get hard. That night, as we held each other, I realized that love, much like pottery, wasn't about perfection. It was about patience, resilience, and the willingness to keep molding through the cracks. And as Jamie whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me," I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. The weeks that followed felt like a roller coaster, wrapped in a blanket of clay, dust, and quiet moments. Jamie and I found ourselves leaning on each other more than ever. The pottery workshops were still our anchor, but life's challenges were shaping us in ways I couldn't have predicted. His dad's condition was progressing faster than anyone had hoped, and the toll it took on Jamie was obvious, even on days when he tried to mask it with a joke or a smile. One afternoon, I showed up at Jamie's place with a couple of mugs I'd made in my spare time. Nothing fancy, just simple, a little rough around the edges, but I thought maybe they could be something we shared, like a small, steady symbol amidst all the chaos. When Jamie opened the door, his face brightened in a way that made my chest tighten. "Eli, I wasn't expecting you. Thought you could use a little caffeine boost," I teased, holding out the mugs. He took one, his fingers curling around the warm ceramic like it was more than just a cup. "Thanks. You always know when I need a pick-me-up." We sat down on his couch, the afternoon sun casting soft light through the window. For a moment, it felt like everything was normal, the kind of normal I hadn't realized I'd been craving so badly. But then Jamie's phone buzzed, and his smile faltered. He glanced at the screen, then back at me, eyes clouded with worry. "It's my mom," he said softly. "Dad had another bad day." I reached out, squeezing his hand. "Want to talk about it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "It's hard. Yesterday, he didn't recognize me at all. For a moment, I felt like a stranger in my own family." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's awful." "I'm sorry, Jamie." He looked down at his mug, tracing the rim absent-mindedly. "I'm scared. Scared of losing him before he's really gone." I pulled him close, my heart aching for the pain he was carrying. "We'll get through this. Together." Jamie leaned into me, and in that quiet, shared space, I realized just how deeply I cared for him, how much I wanted to be a steady presence in the storm. The next few days were tough. Jamie disappeared into family obligations, leaving me to pick up the slack at the workshop. I missed him more than I expected, the empty spaces in the studio echoing the hole his absence left. One evening, after class, I found a note tucked into my apron pocket. It was Jamie's handwriting, messy but unmistakable. Eli, thanks for being you. I'm trying to be strong, but sometimes I need a break. Could we meet tomorrow? I have something to show you. Jay. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I couldn't say no. The next day, I showed up at his apartment, a little nervous, a little hopeful. Jamie opened the door, eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. Come in, he said, leading me inside. The walls were lined with new shelves, and in the center of the room sat a pottery wheel. Jamie had set up his own little studio. I thought maybe we could work on something together, he said, gesturing at the wheel. I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth spread through me. I'd like that. We spent the afternoon side by side, hands covered in clay, talking quietly between spins. Jamie was slower than usual, distracted by the weight of recent weeks, but the determination in his eyes never faded. At one point, he looked over at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. He said, when I first started this, I didn't expect it would mean so much. Neither did I admitted. But maybe that's the point. It's not just about pottery, it's about learning how to hold on, even when things get messy. Jamie nodded, his gaze softening. Thanks for helping me hold on. As the sun set outside, casting a golden glow over the room, we created something imperfect but beautiful. A reminder that even in the hardest times, connection and love can be the things that keep us grounded. I squeezed his hand, whispering, "We're in this together." And for the first time in a long time, Jamie smiled without reservation, like he believed it too. After that afternoon at Jamie's makeshift studio, something between us shifted in a way I didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. No big declarations or grand gestures, but it was there, like the soft curve of a pot taking shape under careful hands. We had built this fragile, beautiful thing, and it was ours. The next week's pottery class felt different too. Jamie was back at the community center. But there was a quiet strength in him, a steadiness I hadn't seen in a while. We worked side by side, fingers coated in clay, the wheel spinning slow and steady beneath our palms. I caught him watching me once or twice, a little smile playing at the corners of his lips, and I felt that same flutter in my chest I'd been chasing since the beginning. After class, instead of heading straight home like usual, Jamie surprised me by asking if I wanted to grab a drink. I almost didn't say yes. I was exhausted and had plans to binge some show and do nothing. But the way he asked felt different, hopeful, maybe even a little nervous. We ended up at this quiet little bar a few blocks away, the kind of place with low lighting and a playlist that sounded like it was curated by someone who really liked jazz. We ordered some beers, and for the first time in a while, I felt like we were just two people. No worries, no looming fears. So, Jamie said, swirling his drink, "How do you feel about taking this pottery thing a little further? Outside of class?" I raised an eyebrow, grinning. "Like an actual project?" "Yeah, like maybe a joint project. Something that's ours." I thought about it for a second. "Sounds like a great idea. What did you have in mind?" He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make the conversation feel like a secret. "There's this local art fair coming up in a couple of months. I was thinking maybe we could put together a little booth, sell some pieces, show people what we've been working on." I blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "Wow, that's ambitious." Jamie shrugged, but I could see the excitement behind it. "Maybe a little, but I think it could be fun, and a good way to keep us focused on something positive." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me I hadn't expected. "I'm in." We clinked our glasses, sealing the unspoken promise between us. Over the next several weeks, our routine morphed. Pottery class remained the backbone, but the rest of our time was spent experimenting, making messes, and slowly building a collection of pieces we were proud of. Our apartment became our workshop during the evenings. Clay dust on the floor, glaze stains on the counters, the hum of music mixing with the spinning wheel. There were late nights filled with laughter when a pot collapsed unexpectedly, and quiet moments of frustration when nothing seemed to come out right. But through it all, Jamie and I grew closer, learning how to communicate without words, how to support each other's creative flares, and how to hold space when one of us was feeling off. One night, After a particularly frustrating session where my vase had crumbled in the kiln, I was ready to throw in the towel. Jamie caught my eye, eyes warm and steady. "Hey, it's not about the end product. It's about the process, the learning, the imperfections." I sighed, running my hands through my hair. "I know, but it still pleased mess when something you put so much into just falls apart." He smiled softly, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "That's life, though, isn't it? Sometimes things fall apart so something better can take shape." His words struck a chord deeper than the clay beneath our fingers. I found myself leaning into him, grateful for the quiet reassurance. As the art fair approached, nerves started creeping in. We weren't professional potters by any means, just two guys who stumbled into this world, and the idea of showing our work to strangers felt terrifying. But Jamie's enthusiasm was infectious, and I knew that, whatever happened, we'd face it together. The night before the fair, we stayed up late, arranging our pieces, setting up a plan for the booth, and dreaming a little about what this could become. When we finally collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but exhilarated, Jamie looked over at me with a tired grin. "Thanks for being my partner in crime," he said softly. I smiled back, feeling a swell of affection so strong it almost hurt. "Always." The next morning, the sun was just beginning to peek through the curtains when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jamie. Ready to make some magic? I rolled over, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through, the struggles, the small victories, the moments of doubt and hope, and I knew the answer was yes. Absolutely, I whispered to myself, because sometimes the best things in life aren't perfect or planned. They're the messy, beautiful creations we mold with someone who makes the whole process worthwhile. The day of the art fair arrived quicker than Jamie and I met early, hauling our boxes of pottery through the crowded park, trying to find the perfect spot to set up our booth. Our hands were shaky, but our eyes held that quiet determination we'd built over weeks of working together. As we arranged our pieces, the rough vases, the uneven bowls, the little mugs with our initials carved into the bottoms, I realized just how far we'd come. These weren't just lumps of clay. They were markers of every late night, every shared laugh, every moment we'd been there for each other when things got messy. The fair opened, and people began to wander past, some stopping to admire, some asking questions. Jamie and I worked together seamlessly, passing pieces back and forth, telling stories about our process, our mistakes, our small victories. It felt less like selling, and more like sharing a piece of ourselves. At one point, a woman picked up the vase Jamie had made for me, the one with our initials carved on the bottom. I caught Jamie's eye, and we exchanged a small smile. This little piece meant more to us than anyone could understand. Hours passed, and as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the booths, I looked at Jamie, sitting beside me on the edge of the curb, the exhaustion clear on his face, but also a quiet happiness. "I'm proud of us," I said softly. He smiled, reaching out to take my hand. "Me too. For all the messy parts, it's been worth it." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a warmth that wasn't just from the day's sun. This, us, wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, grounded in honesty and care. As we packed up, Jamie turned to me with that familiar half smile that had hooked me from the start. "So what's next for us? Another workshop? Maybe a bigger project?" I laughed, the sound light and full of promise. "Whatever it is, I'm in, with you." He leaned in, brushing a stray hair from my forehead, and I felt the steady beat of his heart against mine. "Same here," he whispered. Walking home together, our hands still intertwined, I realized that love, like pottery, isn't about flawless pieces. It's about showing up, molding together through cracks and imperfections, and finding beauty in the process. And with Jamie by my side, I was ready for whatever came next.